This week, I'm sharing the recap of my Parsha shir from my dining room table because I am staying safe at home as I complete my quarantine from the exposure, the potential exposure at Shul during Minyan last week. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, I'm feeling great. And my wife would tell you that there is a side benefit to me being home more because I am now responsible for making dinner. This week, I taught on the topic of the pace of life. Rabbi Lamb in 1960 wrote his drasha with the title of On the Highway of Life about 3 words that Yosef shares with his brothers. After he reveals his true identity to them, he sends them back to fetch their father Yaakov, and he gives them some advice, which Chazal view as quite significant. He says to them, Al tirgezu baderech, do not be quarrelsome on the way back home. Chazal were fascinated by this counsel and tried to read into these words a number of ideas that Yosef had in mind and what motivated him to give this specific piece of advice. One of the most meaningful interpretations can be found in the Midrash Rabbah, where 3 specific reasons are given for these words of Al tirgezu baderech. The first is Al tifseu psia gasa. Do not take large steps. Do not speed too quickly. Because of course, Yosef wanted his brothers to relay the message back that he was alive to Yaakov right away. He didn't want to leave Yaakov tormented another moment. But Yosef also knew that speed is the greatest cause of fatal accidents. You are going to give our father some great and marvelous news, Yosef told his brothers, but do not endanger your lives by rushing or hurrying too quickly, because that's often when mistakes happen. The second instruction that Yosef gave them in his words of Al tirgezu baderech are hichnesu b'chama la'ir. Maybe there's a word play here on tirgaz, which could mean anger, and chema, which means also anger. But the way we understand this piece of advice is that the brothers should call it a night when they're traveling back, when it's still light out. They should enter a city, when it's still daytime, because they do not want to be suspect of any kind of design or plan. They were a large group and they had lots of food and resources that Yosef loaded them up with. They needed to be very careful about the perception, the public perception of who they were, so as not to endanger themselves. They needed to be smart. They needed to be safe. And finally, the third piece of advice that was intended in these 3 words is Al ta'amidu atzmechem midivrei Torah. That although you are on your way for an exciting and intensely redemptive mission to tell your father, our father, that I'm alive, don't cease to study Torah. Torah should still be what you talk about. You shouldn't talk about controversial things that will cause you to argue and fight, but you should talk about pleasant and peaceful and inspiring piece of Torah. So this counsel that Yosef gave his brothers, as the rabbis expounded it, certainly has relevance beyond Yosef's particular circumstance and the brothers' particular mission. I would suggest that specifically at our time, the first sort of layer of meaning of these words is most resonant, that we should appreciate the way that this pandemic has slowed down our lives. Yosef tells his brothers about the danger of psia gasa, the curse of speed in our daily lives, the problem of our constant, unceasing rush through life. And all of us can relate to that mad hurry, which characterizes our civilization, and that compulsion that we have to always be busy in order to feel important. But the gift of the current historical moment is that we have had to slow down. We have been forced to appreciate the scenery, to appreciate the people who we are on this highway of life together with. I know in my family, we have weekly family reunions in a way that we never had before the last 9 months. And so hopefully we can internalize Yosef's advice of Al Tirgezu Baderech specifically through the lens of Al Tifsu Psia Gasa. Don't go too quickly. Appreciate the blessing and the gifts of slowing things down. I wish everyone a wonderful